I've cried, y'all, and this data is not looking good for the achievement schools in Hillsborough County Public Schools, and I don't want to make this video longer than what it needs to be, but if we don't do something now, the way that this data is looking, it is dismantling our communities. So what schools are achievement schools? So that way everyone has a clear picture of what's going on. Hillsborough County Public Schools created a program and they called it achievement schools. And the intention behind this, well, the supposed intention behind this was to level the playing field and have equity amongst the schools and provide the best teachers and the best leadership to these schools to turn it around and bridge the gap. In theory, it sounds great. But when you have programs like this that's not done with fidelity, when you are not strategic with your leadership, when you are changing positions here and there, left and right, and we are not consistent with your policies, there's a lot of things that happen. And just from personal experience, things can get out of control fast. There are 50 schools that are achievement schools, and allegedly they were selected by performance data. So this is the list of the achievement schools. You can find this on the website. And this document has been changed so many times. And the reason why I bring that up is because leadership has been changed in the achievement schools for so long and so frequent that it actually should be investigated. Why are there so many leaders that are at achievement schools moving, which shift the culture of the school, which takes years to rebuild? Also, I want you to note that the tiers that are listed there for each individual school. Tier 3 are the schools that need the most support in comparison to Tier 1. And just looking at this data, this document, you can see that there's a lot of elementary schools that are Tier 3, which means that these elementary schools need the most support. There's something happening in some of these communities where Tier 3 intensive support is needed for elementary school. There are a few middle schools, and there are a few high schools, and there are a few K through 8 schools. But primarily when you look at this document, all you see is ES, and that stands for elementary schools. So I just want to say congratulations to the following achievement schools. I went through every single piece of data for all the achievement schools, and I have listed here the schools that were a C and stayed a C, or raised up a letter grade from wherever they were at. Now, let's talk about the schools that we need to support. FOLSOM Elementary. This school is a D and has been a D for the past 4 years. Now, the data on this looks pretty interesting. So 76.7% minority students, okay? And then 90% of those are economically disadvantaged, with 15% of their student population having disabilities. 33% of their third graders passed the ELA test on their campus. And then 46% of their third grade students taking the math test passed it. And so just to put it in comparison to the state average is 58% for ELA. Foster Elementary. So this school is now an F, and it was a D before and has been a D prior. It has 92.5 minority students. 95 of the student population is economically disadvantaged. There's 24% of the student population that have disabilities. I need you guys to pay close attention to these numbers. 13% of the entire third grade on this campus passed the FSA. That is required for them to be promoted to the 4th grade. So let me say that again. 13% of the students on this campus, third graders, that took the ELA FSA test, passed it. Majority of this campus, third graders, will be held back because they did not pass this test. And then you have third grade at this school, Foster Elementary. 15% of them passed the math. There's a bigger issue than a testing issue. There's something fundamentally wrong when there's 13% of all the third graders on that campus that pass the test when the state average is 58%. James Elementary. It is an F. It was an F last year, and the time before that, it was a D school. 96.9% minority student population. 97% of the student population economically disadvantaged, with 14% of their student population having disabilities. 9% of all the third graders at James Elementary pass the ELA test that determines if they move to fourth grade. That entire campus, all the third graders at James Elementary, you mean to tell me that only 9%? I was sad at 13, but 9? Y'all, we need y'all. We need y'all to speak up. We need, like, this breaks my heart. So, all the third graders at James Elementary that took the math FSA, only 14% of those passed. McDonald Elementary. So, this school is a D school. It's been a D school for all 4 years. What I find very interesting, though, is the minority students that's at this school. So it's 49.4%, and then economically disadvantaged is 90. Students with disabilities is 20, and then you have 38% of the students that pass the ELA, and then you have 32% of the third grade students that pass the math FSA portion. They don't have a high number of minority students, but they're still facing the same thing. The only thing that they have in common is the economically disadvantaged. MORT Elementary. So the school dropped. So it was a C last year, and now being an achievement school, they're at a D. 90% of the students are minority. 93% of these students are economically disadvantaged, with 16% of the student population having disabilities. 21% of the third graders on this campus pass the ELA test that is required for them to be promoted to the fourth grade. 21%. Then you have the third graders at MORT Elementary. Only 34% of those pass the math portion of the FSA test. PIZZO. So now moving into an achievement school, it is now a D. 91.4% is minority students, with 89% economically disadvantaged, with 17% of the student population having disabilities. 32% of all the third graders at PIZZO Elementary pass the ELA required FSA test. And the third graders at PIZZO pass the math portion. Cleveland. So being an achievement school, it dropped. So it's now a D school. 88.8% of minority students. 96% is economically disadvantaged. You have students with disability, 19%. 32% of the third graders on this campus passed the ELA FSA test. And 23% of the third graders passed the math FSA test. Oak Park. It's an F. It was an F last year, and it was D's before that. This school has a 96% minority, with 98% economically disadvantaged. It has 18% of students with disabilities on their campus. 19% of Oak Park's third graders passed the required FSA test to be promoted to the fourth grade. 19%. So only 20% of the third graders passed the math at Oak Park. Potter Elementary. So since being in an achievement school, it dropped from being a C to a D, and before that, they were an F school. 97.9% are minority students, with 97% that are economically disadvantaged. You have 13% of students that have disabilities. At Potter Elementary, the third graders, only 16% of them pass the ELA test. That is a requirement for them to move to the next grade. You have 22% of the third graders at Potter Elementary that pass the math. ROBLES. It's been a D consistently for the past 4 years. 92.3% is minority students. 94% is economically disadvantaged. You have 16% of the student population that have disabilities. On the campus of ROBLES, only 16% of their third graders pass the ELA test. Only 16% of their third graders passed. 15% of the third graders passed the math FSA test as well. Sulphur Springs. Now, although Sulphur Springs has actually improved the letter grade, and that's why I put a star by, because congratulations. I also need to highlight these test numbers though. So you mean to tell me that we gather around all the third graders on that campus, only 14% of those pass with a level 3 or above? This is not a test issue. This is beyond a test issue. There's something fundamentally wrong with the campus, fundamentally wrong with the structure. There's something happening that's deeper. If we're just doing statistics and we're comparing the number 58 to the number 14, that is the very, very, very bottom of that matrix. Jennings Middle School. So since being in an achievement school, the grade actually went down to a D. 79.6% minority students, 92% economically disadvantaged. 21% of those students have disabilities. 19% of the sixth graders that took the ELA test passed it. And then when we also look at the sixth grade math FSA test, only 18% of those students passed. I'm not from Tampa. I don't know how to say that. I'm not trying to pronounce it because y'all not about to laugh at me. So the grade is a D. 60.9% minority. 88 economically disadvantaged. 14% with students that have disabilities. 30% of that campus, their third graders pass the FSA reading test. And 37% of the third graders pass the math test. Yeah, I don't know how to say that, y'all. I'm sorry. I'm not from here. Broward Elementary. So since being an achievement school, it is now a D. 95.9% are minority students. 96% are economically disadvantaged. 20% of the students on that campus have disabilities. 20% of all the third graders on that campus pass the ELA test. And only 30% of their third grade pass the math. DUNBAR. So since being an achievement school, it has dropped down. So now it is a D. 91.6% are minority students. 94% are economically disadvantaged, with 11% students with disabilities. 42% of the third graders on that campus pass the required FSA reading test. And 67% of the third graders pass the math. Kingsley. So it is a D, and it has been a D. 82.7% is minority. 95% is economically disadvantaged, with 20% of their student population having disabilities. 24% of the third graders on this campus pass the FSA reading test. And only 17% of the third graders pass the math. KIMBELL is an F, and it was an F last year, and D's before that. 91.2 minority students, with 95% economically disadvantaged, with 17% of students that have disabilities. Only 19% of all the third graders on that campus pass the FSA reading test. Y'all hear this, right? And only 14% of the third graders on that campus pass the FSA math. Lockhart Elementary, since being an achievement school, has dropped the letter grade, so now it is a D. 95.9% are minority students. 93% are economically disadvantaged, with 19% of the student population having disabilities. Only 23% on that campus of third graders that took that FSA reading test passed it. 25% of the third graders that took the math passed. Miles is a D school, was a D school last year, being an achievement model. 89.1% are minority students, with 96% being economically disadvantaged. You have 13% of the student population having disabilities. Only 24% of the third graders on that campus passed the FSA reading test. And only 24% of the third graders on that campus passed the FSA math. This is beyond the test, folks. There's something fundamentally wrong. They're at the bottom matrix. BURNEY Elementary School. Since being an achievement school, it has dropped down to a D. It is 87.9 minority students, economically disadvantaged, 98%, with 22% of the student population having disabilities. 29% of their third graders on that campus passed the FSA reading test. And 29% of their third graders also passed the math as well. Which means there are more people that didn't pass it than the people that passed it. Mango Elementary is the D. Since being an achievement school, it did drop down. It was a C before that, and then it was some D's before that. So 73.8% minority students, with 92% economically disadvantaged. You have 15% of the student population having disabilities. 35% of the third graders at Mango Elementary passed the FSA reading test. And 30% of the third graders at Mango Elementary School passed the math section. So thank you for watching. This is the data, and you can view it for yourself. I posted the link right here. But we got to do something, y'all.